She stood alone at the edge of the granite wall. So why did it feel like every ghost on the base was watching her? The names were cold beneath her fingertips, 847 of them, chiseled deep enough to outlast memory. Brigadier General Marlowe Garrett didn't read them anymore. She felt them, each one a weight, each one a reminder that leadership always ended the same way: someone paid the price. Her fingers stopped. CPT DSLANGARTT. KIA Mosul 2017. Her breath caught, it always did. The bracelet on her wrist was worn thin now, black metal rubbed silver at the edges from 7 years of constant contact. She never took it off. Not for sleep, not for dress blues, not for pain. Still here, she whispered, still fighting. The wall didn't answer. It never did. She turned and ran. 6 miles, same route, same cadence. The discipline wasn't about fitness anymore, it was about control. If she stopped moving, the memories caught up. The sound of the explosion, the radio call that came too late, the silence that followed. At 42, she still outran most lieutenants. Not to prove a point, but because she couldn't afford weakness, not in a uniform that had spent decades doubting women like her. She finished her run breathing steady, sweat cooling against her skin. No ceremony, no witnesses. Just another Marine starting another day. The mess hall was busy when she stepped inside. Loud, casual, safe. She liked places like this, where rank disappeared, where Marines were just Marines. She took a tray and stood in line, wearing nothing that marked her as anything other than another body passing through. That's when the air changed. She felt it before she heard it, the shift, the tension, the way instinct whispered before logic could speak. The voice came from behind her, too loud, too confident. This isn't a chow line for civilians. She didn't turn yet. A hand landed on her shoulder. Not asking. Claiming. Her spine straightened. She turned slowly. The Marine was big, staff sergeant, built like someone who'd never been told no and never learned the difference between authority and intimidation. "You don't belong here," he said. The room didn't go quiet, but it listened. Marlowe met his eyes, calm, level. "The sign says all hands welcome," she said. "It's still posted hours." His jaw tightened. "This is for Marines." "So am I," she replied. The words landed without force, without explanation. He laughed. Then he shoved her. Hard. Enough to move most people. She shifted 6 inches. That was all. Didn't stumble, didn't drop her tray, didn't raise her voice. The silence this time was real. "Remove your hand," she said quietly. He didn't. He grabbed her arm instead. That's when something broke, not in her but in the room. Because fear looks one way, and certainty looks another. And she had certainty. "You're making a mistake," she said, "one you can't undo." He sneered. Then the doors opened. And everything changed. The lieutenant colonel snapped to attention first. Then the command sergeant major. Then 300 Marines rose in a single motion that sounded like thunder. "General Garrett," the officer said, voice tight. "Ma'am." The staff sergeant went white. Not pale. Empty. Marlowe adjusted her sleeve, smoothed her pullover, looked at the man who'd shoved her without anger, without triumph. Only disappointment. "We're going to step outside," she said. "You and I need to talk." Later, standing beneath the California sun, the bruises already blooming purple along her arm, she gave orders like she always did. Calmly, precisely. "Document everything. Relieve him." No shouting, no spectacle. Justice didn't need volume. It needed clarity. Inside, the Marines waited. She went back to them. Because leadership doesn't hide after impact. This was a failure, she told them. Not just his, ours. No yelling, no blame, just truth. Dignity doesn't speak, she finished quietly. It acts. In the weeks that followed, the base changed. Slowly, painfully. Meetings, hearings, hard conversations no one wanted to have. The staff sergeant pleaded guilty. She could have ended him. Instead, she chose something harder. A chance. Because her brother once believed the worst moments didn't have to be the last ones. Months later, watching rain soak the parade ground as Marines trained under her command, Marlowe touched the bracelet again. Leadership wasn't about power. It was about standing still when the world tried to push you back. And refusing to move. Because sometimes, the strongest response isn't force. It's restraint. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did no one move when he grabbed her arm? That question would haunt more than a few Marines later. But in that moment, time felt suspended, like the entire mess hall was holding its breath, waiting to see which way gravity would fall. Marlowe Garrett felt the pressure of his fingers before the pain registered. Not crushing. Not yet. Just firm enough to send a message. Dominance masquerading as authority. She looked down at his hand on her sleeve, then back up at his face. He was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind that came from certainty. From believing the room belonged to you. From believing no one would stop you. She had seen that smile before. In Fallujah, in Damascus, on men who thought power was something you took instead of something you carried. "Take your hand off me," she said again. Her voice didn't rise. That unsettled him more than shouting ever could. "What are you going to do?" he asked, loud enough now that nearby tables had gone quiet. "Call your husband. Cry to someone who actually matters." There it was. The assumption. She felt something tighten in her chest, not anger, not fear, memory. Her brother's voice, years ago, laughing as they cleaned rifles under a desert sun. "Don't let them decide who you are for you, Mar ever." The Marine shoved her again, harder this time. Chairs scraped, someone cursed under their breath, a tray clattered to the floor behind them. Still, no one intervened. Not because they agreed with him, but because uncertainty is contagious. Marlowe planted her feet. She had learned long ago that strength wasn't about reacting fast. It was about reacting correctly. "You've crossed a line," she said, "and you don't even know where you're standing." That gave him pause, just a fraction of a second. Doubt flickered across his face like a glitch. Then pride roared back in. "You think quoting regulations makes you important," he snapped. "You think pretending you belong here gives you authority." He leaned in close enough that she could smell stale coffee on his breath. "You don't outrank me." Around them, Marines watched with the strange paralysis that comes when reality doesn't match expectation. This wasn't how confrontations were supposed to go. The woman wasn't shrinking. The staff sergeant wasn't winning. Something was wrong, but no one could name it yet. Marlowe felt the weight of the room. 300 sets of eyes, 300 futures, and one choice that would define all of them. She could end it now. One sentence. One name. One flash of rank. But then she'd never know. Never know who would stand up when it mattered. Never know how deep the rot went, or how strong the foundation still was. So she waited. He tightened his grip. That was his mistake. "You are assaulting me," she said calmly, "and you're doing it in front of witnesses." He laughed. "Witnesses to what? You causing trouble." Her gaze shifted, not to him but past him, to a young lance corporal frozen mid-bite, to a private whose knuckles were white around his fork, to an NCO at a nearby table who looked away. "Every one of you is watching," she said softly, and every one of you will remember what happens next." The staff sergeant felt the room turn. He didn't understand why, but he felt it. That was when the doors opened. The sound cut through the mess hall like a blade. Boots purposeful, fast. A voice snapped, sharp and unmistakable, "Staff Sergeant." The grip on her arm loosened, too late. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell crossed the floor at a pace that left no room for interpretation. Command Sergeant Major Knox followed, his presence alone enough to bend spines. And then, General Garrett. The word hit the room like a shockwave. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chairs scraped back as 300 Marines stood in unison, the sound echoing off steel and concrete, a reflex carved into muscle memory since boot camp. The staff sergeant staggered back as if struck. "No," he whispered. Marlowe gently pulled her arm free. She didn't glare, didn't raise her voice. She adjusted her sleeve. "Stand down," she said, not to him but to the room, at ease. No one moved. Shock does that, it locks people in place. She turned to the staff sergeant now, really looked at him. "You assumed," she said, "and assumptions get people hurt." His face had drained of color, his mouth opened, closed, no sound came out. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, tone professional, "we'll take this outside." The walk through the doors felt longer than it was. The sun outside was blinding. The air tasted different, real. She rolled up her sleeve. Purple bruises were already forming, 5 distinct marks. "Photograph that," she said. "Document everything. No anger, just procedure." Because justice didn't need emotion, it needed accuracy. When she finished her statement, silence settled heavy between them. "This isn't just about him," she said finally. "It's about what he thought he could get away with." Inside the mess hall, Marines sat in stunned quiet. Some stared at their trays, appetite gone. Some replayed the moment in their minds, the second they could have stepped in and didn't. And one question echoed, louder than any order ever could. If she hadn't been a general, would anyone have stopped it? Marlowe went back inside. Because leadership doesn't retreat when things get uncomfortable. "This was a failure," she told them, "and we're going to fix it. Not with punishment alone, but with accountability, with honesty, with the courage to act before rank gives permission." She left them with that. Outside, as the day moved on and the base resumed its rhythm, Marlowe stood alone for a moment. Her hand found the bracelet. "I saw it," she whispered. "I saw who we are." And for the first time since Mosul, she wasn't sure whether that gave her comfort or resolve. How does a man sleep when he realizes the moment that ruined him was entirely his own doing? Staff Sergeant Von Keller didn't sleep at all that night. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned, each rotation cutting time into useless pieces. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the air vent, boots passing somewhere outside, the distant thud of a door. His uniform hung from the chair like an accusation. He replayed it over and over. The shove, the grip, the way she hadn't moved. Worst of all, not the moment the lieutenant colonel said her name, not the way the room stood up in unison, but the look on her face just before that. Not fear, not anger, assessment. Like she'd been deciding something about him long before he realized he was being judged. Keller rolled onto his side and pressed his palm into his eyes. He told himself 100 stories to survive the years. Stories about being hard because the world was hard, about control because chaos killed people, about authority because without it, everything fell apart. But none of those stories explained why he'd felt small standing in front of her. Across the base, Brigadier General Marlowe Garrett was awake too. Not because of adrenaline, that had burned off hours ago, because stillness invited memory. She sat alone in her office, the lights low, jacket folded neatly over the back of her chair. Her arm ached, not badly but enough to remind her it was there. Purple had spread deeper now, blooming like ink beneath the skin. Mitchell had insisted on medical documentation. Knox had insisted on security footage. Everyone wanted procedure. She understood. But what weighed on her wasn't the assault. It was the silence. 300 Marines. And only one had acted. She turned her bracelet slowly around her wrist, the metal cool against her skin. "What would you have done?" she whispered to the empty room. Her brother didn't answer. But she remembered the last conversation they'd had before Mosul. Not dramatic, not profound. Just tired honesty shared between siblings who'd both been too long at war. Declan had leaned back against the Humvee, helmet off, sweat streaking dust down his face. "Promise me something," he'd said. "What?" "If you ever end up in a place where people stop speaking up, don't ignore it. Silence is where bad leaders hide." She exhaled slowly. The investigation began at first light. Statements, dozens of them. Some shaky, some rehearsed, some painfully honest. "I didn't know what to do. I thought someone else would step in. I didn't think it was my place." Marlowe read every single one. Not to judge. To understand. By midday, the pattern was clear. Fear of rank. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being wrong. Fear had done more damage than the shove ever could. Meanwhile, Keller sat alone in a small administrative office, waiting. His phone buzzed once, a message from his platoon sergeant that said nothing useful, no reassurance, no anger, just distance. He stared at his hands. They were shaking. He'd been in firefights. He'd been blown off his feet. He'd dragged wounded Marines through dust and noise and confusion. This was worse, because there was no enemy to fight. Only himself. When they escorted him into the hearing room 2 days later, he felt every eye on him, even though only a handful of people were present. Mitchell, Knox, legal counsel, and her. Marlowe sat at the far end of the table in full uniform now, ribbons precise, stars catching the light, composed in a way that made the room feel smaller. Keller couldn't meet her eyes at first. The charges were read. The words landed heavier than he expected. Assault. Conduct unbecoming. Abuse of authority. Each one peeled away a layer of denial. When they asked for his plea, his lawyer leaned toward him, whispering advice, strategy, options. Keller raised a hand. "I plead guilty." The room went still. His lawyer froze. Mitchell looked up slowly. "You understand what that means, Staff Sergeant?" Keller swallowed. "Yes, sir." It wasn't courage that made him say it. It was exhaustion. The truth came out piece by piece after that. Security footage, witness statements, medical photos. Keller watched himself on the screen, saw the way he leaned in, the way he used his body like a weapon. He barely recognized the man. When they finally asked Marlowe to speak, she stood. Not dramatically, just deliberately. "I understand trauma," she said, "but trauma doesn't give us permission to become what hurt us." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. That somehow made it worse. "You made choices," she continued, "and choices carry weight." Keller's chest tightened. He nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak. When it was over, when the room cleared and the legal language faded, Marlowe remained seated. Watching him. "Look at me," she said. He did. "I could end your career," she said evenly, "and no one here would question it." He nodded again. "Yes, ma'am. But I won't." That finally broke something in him. He looked up sharply. "Why?" She studied him for a long moment. "Because I want to see who you are when power is taken away," she said, "not who you pretend to be when you have it." He didn't know what to say. Neither did she. That night the base felt different. Quieter, like something fundamental had shifted. Marlowe walked the perimeter trail again before dawn alone, the same route, the same cadence. But the weight felt different now. Heavier, because leadership wasn't about making the right decision once. It was about standing by it when doubt crept in. As the sun rose, she slowed, letting her breath settle. "You were right," she whispered to the memory beside her. "Silence tells you everything." And somewhere behind her, the base woke up, unaware that something fragile had been broken open. Not with force, but with truth. Because sometimes the hardest battles don't end with victory. They begin with accountability. What happens to authority when no one is sure who deserves it anymore? The base didn't explode with outrage or fracture into camps. It did something far more unsettling. It watched itself. Marlowe felt it the moment she stepped onto the parade ground that morning. The glances lasted a fraction longer. Conversations softened when she passed, not out of fear, but reflection. Marines weren't wondering what she would do next. They were wondering what they would have done. She stood near the reviewing stand, hands clasped behind her back as companies moved through morning drill. Precision, discipline, the surface-level proof that everything still worked. But she knew better. Institutions don't crack loudly. They erode quietly, one unchallenged moment at a time. That afternoon she called a closed-door meeting, not command staff, not officers only. NCOs. The backbone, the culture carriers, the ones whose words mattered when rank wasn't in the room. They filled the briefing space slowly, some stiff, some guarded, some visibly uneasy. A few still carried anger directed everywhere and nowhere at once. Marlowe waited until the door closed. No speech yet. Silence first. She let it stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. "You all know why you're here," she said finally, "so let's not pretend." No one spoke. "I'm not here to lecture," she continued. "I'm here to listen." That got their attention. One gunnery sergeant shifted in his seat. A master sergeant crossed his arms tighter. Marlowe leaned back against the table. "When you saw it happening," she asked, "what stopped you?" The question landed hard. No blame in her voice, no trap. Just honesty. Seconds passed. Then a staff sergeant spoke up, voice rough. "I didn't know who you were." Marlowe nodded, fair. Another followed. "I thought it wasn't my lane." A third, quieter. "I was wrong and I froze." That one stayed with her. Freeze. Not cowardice, not malice. Overload. She listened as the room slowly found its voice. Rank anxiety, conflicting instincts, the fear of overstepping, the unspoken rule that you don't challenge someone senior unless you're absolutely certain. "And what does certainty look like?" Marlowe asked. No one answered. Because certainty, she knew, was a luxury. Most decisions happened in fog. "That fog," she said, "is where character lives." The room stilled. She straightened. This wasn't about gender, or rank, or ego. It was about dignity, and dignity doesn't wait for permission. That line cut deeper than she expected. A few heads bowed. She dismissed them without orders, without threats. Just responsibility. Later, alone in her office, Marlowe stared at the open file on her desk. Staff Sergeant Keller's service record. There was good there, real good. Commendations earned the hard way. Lives saved. Marines trained well. Leadership moments that mattered. That was the problem. It would have been easier if he'd been a villain. Her phone buzzed. "Mitchell." "They're recommending reduction in rank," he said. Administrative reassignment, counseling. Marlowe closed her eyes. And your opinion? A pause. I think he's standing at a crossroads. So did she. She requested to see Keller again. He entered her office stiffly, eyes forward. He'd lost weight in a week. Sleep deprivation showed in the lines around his mouth. Sit, she said. He did. She didn't start with the incident. She started with his record. You've led Marines through hell, she said. You've done things most people couldn't. He nodded once. So tell me, she asked, when did you stop seeing the people around you? That hit him harder than any accusation. I don't know, he said quietly. She believed him. Power narrows vision, she said. If you're not careful, it convinces you that obedience is the same as respect. He swallowed. I thought control meant safety. It can, she said, until it becomes fear. Silence again. You don't get a clean slate, she said finally, but you're getting a chance. That's more than most. He looked up, eyes red but steady. I won't waste it. I know, she replied, and surprised herself by meaning it. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable. Mandatory discussions, bystander intervention training, leadership evaluations that asked questions no one liked answering. Morale dipped before it stabilized. Some Marines resented it, others welcomed it. Marlowe absorbed the criticism quietly. At night, the doubt crept in. Had she gone too soft? Had restraint sent the wrong message? Had she protected the institution or challenged it too hard? One evening, she stood back at the memorial wall. The names were unchanged, but she was. She pressed her palm against the stone and let herself feel the weight she usually kept buried. I did my best, she whispered. I don't know if it was enough. The wind answered with nothing. Weeks later, during a routine training exercise, she watched Keller, now stripped of his previous authority, working under supervision. No swagger, no shortcuts, just effort. A young Marine stumbled during a drill. Keller stopped the line. Not with a shout, with a hand on the shoulder. Reset, he said, we go again. Marlowe watched closely. That moment mattered more than any punishment. Because redemption doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small, quiet corrections. As she turned to leave the field, she caught sight of a lance corporal stepping in when voices rose too sharply. Another Marine backing him up. No rank involved. Just action. Marlowe felt something ease in her chest. Change wasn't loud. It was cumulative. That night, she wrote a single sentence in her private journal, a habit she'd kept since Mosul. Leadership isn't proven when everyone is watching. It's revealed when no one thinks they have to look. She closed the book. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new failures, new moments where people would hesitate. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar beneath the weight. Hope. Not the naive kind. The earned kind. Because dignity doesn't demand attention. It builds a standard and waits to see who rises to meet it. What does redemption cost when no one is keeping score anymore? Marlowe learned the answer on a cold morning when the alert came in before dawn. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a quiet ping on her secure phone and a single line of text that made her sit up straighter in bed. Unscheduled movement, Eastern Corridor, unknown intent. She dressed without turning on the lights. Years of habit, years of not waking up anyone else, because there was no one else to wake. The drive to the command center was silent, headlights cutting through fog that clung low to the ground like something trying to stay hidden. The base felt different at this hour, stripped of ceremony, honest. Inside, the operations floor hummed with low voices and caffeine. No panic, no bravado, just professionals doing their jobs. Marlowe took her place without announcement. What do we know? She asked. A captain cleared his throat. Small team, not ours, could be contractors, could be something else. They've avoided cameras. Avoided, not tripped. Intentional. That mattered. She leaned over the display, studying movement patterns, routes, pauses, the way the team split and rejoined, the discipline. These aren't amateurs, she said. Someone nodded, someone else swallowed. Moments like this had a way of revealing whether change was real or cosmetic. She turned. I want eyes on the ground, quietly. No rush. Rushing made mistakes. Minutes later, Keller stepped into the command center. He didn't expect to see her there. She saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, then settled. He looked different now. Smaller, maybe, or maybe just more aware of his own edges. "You're up," she said. No preamble, no reminder of what he'd lost. Just trust. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As the team moved out, Marlowe watched their feed from the back of the room. She didn't interfere, didn't micromanage. This wasn't a test. It was a mirror. The unknown group was intercepted without shots fired. Turned out to be a privately contracted security unit operating outside its authorization. Sloppy paperwork. Overconfidence. The kind of thing that happened when people assumed no one was paying attention. Keller handled it cleanly. No posturing, no threats. Just calm authority. When it was over, when reports were filed and the adrenaline had drained away, Marlowe found herself standing alone outside again, watching the sky lighten. Keller approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for trusting me." She studied him for a long moment. "Don't thank me," she said, "earn it." He nodded, no offense taken, no excuses offered. That mattered. Over the next weeks, the base settled into something new, not better, not worse, just more aware. People spoke up faster, stepped in sooner, corrected quietly instead of waiting for escalation. Not perfectly, but progress never was. Marlowe noticed the small things. A corporal interrupting a joke that went too far. An NCO pulling someone aside instead of dressing them down publicly. A lieutenant admitting uncertainty instead of pretending certainty. Culture didn't change because of orders. It changed because people decided what kind of room they wanted to stand in. One evening, long after sunset, Marlowe found herself back at the memorial wall. She hadn't planned to come, her feet just carried her there. The air was cool, the base lights cast long shadows across the stone. She found her brother's name again. Always did. "I used to think leadership meant being right," she whispered. "Then I thought it meant being strong." She rested her forehead briefly against the wall. "Now I think it means being honest enough to let things hurt." Her phone buzzed softly. A message, anonymous feedback from a junior Marine, part of the new reporting initiative. It was short. "I didn't think my voice mattered before. Now I do." Marlowe closed her eyes. That was the cost. Not comfort. Not certainty. Responsibility. She exhaled slowly, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been tight for years. The next morning, during a routine briefing, a young private asked a question that challenged an assumption in the plan. The room stilled. Marlowe watched the faces, the hesitation, the old reflex to shut it down. Then someone answered thoughtfully. The plan adjusted. The private didn't smile. Didn't need to. Afterward, as the room cleared, Mitchell lingered. "You know," he said, "this could have gone very differently." She nodded. It almost did. "Do you ever wonder," he asked carefully, "what would have happened if you'd pulled rank in that mess hall?" She considered it. "Yes," she said, "and I'm glad I didn't." That night, alone in her quarters, Marlowe took off the bracelet for the first time in years. Just for a moment. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, feeling the absence on her wrist. "I think they're going to be okay," she said softly. She put it back on. Some things weren't meant to be left behind. Outside, the base slept. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It shows up quietly, again and again, until people remember who they're supposed to be. What does it mean to stand down when the fight is finally over? Marlowe didn't know the answer the morning she handed over command. The ceremony was efficient, clean, flags precise, words measured, applause respectful but restrained, the way Marines applauded someone they admired without turning it into spectacle. She stood at attention as her replacement took the oath, a capable officer, steady, thoughtful, someone who wouldn't undo what had been built just to make their own mark. That mattered. As the final order was read and the formation dismissed, Marlowe felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the burden was gone, but because it had been carried far enough. She packed her office slowly. No rush, no nostalgia tour, just deliberate closure. The photos went into a small box, the journal into her bag, the folded jacket creased just right over her arm. The desk was bare when she finished. It felt right that way. On her way out, she passed Keller in the hallway. He stopped, hesitated, then spoke. "Ma'am." She turned. He looked different now, not restored, not redeemed in some dramatic sense, just grounded, a man aware of the space he occupied. "I heard," he said, "about your reassignment." "Retirement," she corrected gently. He nodded. "I won't forget what you did." She studied him for a long moment. "Then make sure it wasn't for nothing," she said. He straightened. "I will." That was all. Outside the gate, Marlowe paused. She could have left quietly. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she walked. Past the barracks, past the motor pool, past the training field where voices carried in sharp bursts, corrections, encouragement, laughter. She saw Marines intervene early now, not aggressively, not performatively, just instinctively. The culture wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was awake. She reached the memorial wall one last time as the sun dipped low, casting the stone in amber light. She didn't run her fingers over the names this time. She just stood. "I think you'd approve," she said quietly, "not because it's better, but because it's honest." The wind stirred, the base breathed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to explain herself to the silence. That night, miles away from the base, Marlowe sat on a small porch overlooking nothing remarkable. No flags, no formations, just open space and quiet. She took off the bracelet. Really took it off. Set it on the table beside her. Her wrist felt lighter, not empty, just free. She thought about the mess hall, the shove, the silence, the moment everyone realized who she was and who they had been. She thought about how easily it could have gone another way. How close she'd come to ending it with authority, instead of letting it unfold with consequence. Power could force obedience, but it couldn't teach courage. That had to be chosen. Days turned into weeks. Her name faded from daily briefings, her face from command photos. But the ripples remained. A report came through an old contact, another base, another incident stopped early. A junior Marine intervened. An NCO backed them up. No escalation, no damage. Just dignity. She smiled when she read it. Not pride. Recognition. One evening, she took out the journal again. The last page was blank. She wrote slowly. "We spend so much time teaching people how to fight. We forget to teach them when to stand. She closed it. Outside, the sky darkened, stars emerging one by one. Marlowe leaned back and let the quiet settle. Leadership had cost her certainty, comfort, relationships she never had time to build. But it had given her something rarer. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. The presence of integrity. She knew the world would keep testing the people she'd left behind. New mistakes, new moments of hesitation. But she also knew this. Someone would step forward next time. Not because of rank, not because of fear, but because they remembered what silence felt like and refused to live in it again. Marlowe picked up the bracelet, turned it once in her hand, then placed it back in the box. Some symbols belonged to a chapter that had been lived fully. She stood, went inside, and closed the door behind her. And somewhere on a base she no longer commanded, a Marine saw something wrong and acted. No one noticed. No one applauded. But the standard held. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.